Hey everybody, this is Pastor Steve, and welcome to episode 13 of Coffee Time Q&A. As always, we got our regular hosts with us today. We got the Mad Hatter, Adam Ratstead.
Good morning.
We got Rowdy Rod B. Boozy. I'm about to jack that up. I've had too much coffee today. I kind of warned you.
Yeah.
Far too much coffee, not enough calorie intake. So
Yeah.
I'm pretty.
So we need to start bringing donuts or something.
This could be wild.
That's my coffee.
Yeah. What are we drinking now that are adding to the coffee intake?
All right. So this is Eastern Shore Coastal Roasting Company. And so this is, here from Virginia. And this is called the Oyster Roast.
The Oyster Roast.
Oyster Roast. So give it a shot.
Sounds interesting. Cheers, mates.
Coffee and fish.
It's pretty strong.
Very strong.
It's definitely a dark roast.
That's the kind of thing when we were younger. I don't know if your dads did this, but my dad would say something like, that'll put some hair on your chest right there. That's kind of how I feel about that coffee.
Yeah, that's strong. I probably could have went with a lighter ratio with this coffee than I normally do. I mean, I know I normally do the 15-1. I know, which is pretty strong anyways.
Yeah.
But yeah, I probably could have went a little lighter.
Good flavor though. I like it.
Yeah, but it's good.
Today we're going to tackle a question, another listener question. Adam's got that for us.
I do. Here's the question. They say, I have been listening to some of the more prominent YouTubers and podcasters, and several times I've heard them use the term Big Eva. Big Eva. And not in a good light, but I've never been able to find a clear-cut definition. What or who is Big Eva, and what effect is it having on the Christian church as a whole?
Yeah, maybe because there's probably not a clear-cut definition of what Big Eva is. Yeah. Let's talk about the word, though. Big Eva. Eva short for? Evangelical, right, which is a biblical word. Evangelize, the gospel, euangelion is where that comes from in Greek. And so the reality is evangelical has become sort of a junk word that's defined differently by a lot of folks, and there's a need to redeem that word. As an evangelical, we're talking about a Christian who believes that we are not saved apart from the grace of God, and that the gospel message is something that we have to proclaim. So it's a good word by a strict definition, but it's become almost a political sort of
It's
word.
gained a negative connotation in many circles.
It's almost a voting block now. We think of the evangelical vote. So people talk about it that way. So Big Eva then would refer to, at least to my understanding. Go ahead.
I was just going to say it seems to be more of the corporation of evangelicals, that there are some well-known organizations who are wielding influence, and how is that affecting Christians? How is that affecting the local church?
The church as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Now, I think from the way I look at whenever I hear Big Eva, I think back, and we discussed it earlier a little bit about my past experience in a large denomination, and this was, now granted for me, this was pre-Christ in my life, but witnessing what can happen when you have a liturgical form of church government where the clergy are overall in charge of everything, where there's no side-by-side sitting of the clergy and the lay members, and how easily that can, if it does become corrupted, like it did in the situation that I was in growing up, you can see where when that clergy side becomes corrupted, there's nothing you can't fix it. You know what I mean? There was no ability for the lay people. I mean, like my dad, who stood against it. The only way to stand against it was to just leave, and go to a church that did teach biblical principle. Yeah. And so I think from when I see large denominations go by the wayside, that's what I think of. I think when I hear the term Big Eva. Yeah. So
Yeah, I tend to think it transcends denominations, though. Certainly a large denomination, any large Christian institution, or at least that claims to be Christian, right?
Right.
Large institution, organization, publication, right, that wields influence to a lot of churches, over a lot of churches, whether or not that transcends denominations or not. I think many now are starting to transcend it because you're seeing it in terms of conferences and movements created that go beyond these kind of denominational lines that are more traditional. And so the way I've come to think of Big Eva, or that term, is this evangelical industrial complex, right? And so it is the commercialization to some degree of Christianity. And I think one of the critiques is, as you're getting at, kind of accountability.
right.
You know, who's going to hold these folks accountable? Because what happens is, you know, let's say you have a pastor whose church grows really large, and by virtue of that, he has gained an audience now across the globe because of his influence, and it's created networks of other churches that are like-minded, believe like them. They have conferences. That
Right.
tends to be the way that Big Eva is thought about, of kind of moving its agenda forward through conferences and publications and things like that. And so unless there is any kind of accountability, that there's concern from, say, a local church who's saying, well, this is shaping the Christian landscape in a way that really is more commensurate with whatever motivation or agenda this institution or
Right.
this network of
Okay.
folks has, right? Which could be used for good or for bad, right? And so I don't think it's inherently evil to have large institutions. No accountability is obviously a dangerous spot to be in. So I think that's sort of how I would define it, at least. And there's definitely some critiques and concerns that people have with it. What are some of the things that you guys came across when you thought about like the concerns that maybe some of these YouTubers or bloggers are expressing when they use that term in a negative light, Big Eva?
Yeah, well, it was difficult to discern if I think some out there may think that Big Eva has a unified agenda almost, maybe liberal leaning. So I saw some of that out there, although others would group very, very conservative groups, institutions within Big Eva, so I think it's possible that Big Eva means different things to different people.
For sure.
So
That's why it's a good question.
yeah, I think that's the thing. So when I think of Big Eva, I think there certainly are dangers in that, if dangers maybe to the local church, if these organizations, maybe a YouTuber or podcaster, that's becomes their Christianity for the week, or they're relying more on that than the local church. I think hopefully you think of some that I even saw that were tied into Big Eva, Desiring God, 9 Marks. Those are organizations that are serving the church, right? Those are organizations that are pushing people towards their local churches and encouraging local churches. So there's certainly good things if you think about that, but I don't think there's a unified vision or mission amongst those who are part of Big Eva.
Yeah, I think some are convinced otherwise, in a sense, depending on how you define the term, that are thinking there is this evangelical power structure that is influencing churches across denominations towards a more, progressive liberal agenda, particularly, and this is a lot of the critique that I've come across in, just reading or watching some YouTube videos, towards a more kind of social justice agenda that would line up more with what they would see as progressive liberalism. And that's such a tricky thing, because like every church should preach against injustice and whatnot, but they're talking about a very specific thing that would line up with sort of globalism or socialism or these political ideas that seem to be getting pushed forward, at least in their eyes. Any other critiques, concerns, or?
Well, I mean, like I said, I know we had this discussion off camera, but whenever I hear YouTubers, you know what I'm saying, talking about Big Eva, I think sometimes people get hypercritical and they start poking things that aren't necessarily unbiblical. And I know that I've put it out before, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted, but what does the Bible say, to have some accountability, is because I think that I could very easily, become hypercritical if I'm not careful. You know what I mean? And so
You wanted us to rein him in.
yeah. So to keep myself from being hypercritical, that's why I kind of also wanted that. Like, because if I put a podcast out and Steve and the elders look at me and go, hey, can you fix this one? Because I think you may have said something wrong. I'm going to do it, because I've subjected myself to the authority of the elders. And I think that sometimes when I watch some YouTubers, I kind of look at them, I'm like, do they really have some kind of accountability that they're under when they're putting this stuff out? Yeah. And I think it's important for that, because if you start saying, they're part of Big Eva, but you're wrong, I don't know. You're going to have to stand before God and explain that one.
You're saying the critique of Big Eva is no accountability, but also those critiquing Big Eva
sometimes
probably have no
accountability, right?
Accountability
right.
is
Free for
all over
right.
the place. Yeah.
Now, I will say that I have seen some YouTubers put out some pretty legitimate complaints about stuff that was either written in periodicals or when you read the periodical yourself, you go, wow, yeah, that guy shouldn't have wrote that, because... Yeah. So I think there are some, I think you just have to be kind of discerning yourself when you're watching YouTube, when you're watching or listening to a podcast, and say, is this guy, and do the research yourself. Don't just go off what the person's saying on the podcast or on the YouTube show.
What do you guys think about, so a part of Big Eva would be commercialization that gives rise to Christian celebrities, right? Mm-hmm. Celebrity pastors, celebrity seminary presidents, things like that. What is it that draws us to the celebrity, even in Christianity, do you think? Any thoughts about that? Because I think that feeds into this to some degree.
Oh, absolutely it does.
It creates this culture, and that's part of, the conference circuit, that you have similar speakers at these conferences, and it tends to be sort of a checklist. Like, if your church is under so many thousand people, you're probably not going to get invited to speak.
But I don't think that's a new thing though either.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been doing some research on a guy named Paul of Samosata, who actually had a throne room. You know what I'm saying? Because he was essentially the same as a nowadays celebrity. And he took on that persona of celebrity, even back in, that's 270 AD.
Yeah.
So it's not like necessarily a new thing either, that the celebrity pastor or celebrity church leader thing.
It's like we're all like the Israelites crying for a king when God said, I'll be your, your
really good analogy.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So celebrity pastor, I think part of it is that exactly what you said. People feel drawn to, they want to see a physical body to give them the information. I also think it has some to do with people wanting to put their belief on a person. That's why one of the reasons why I'm so for, lay members learning to read the Bible themselves, because even those people need to stand an account.
Yeah.
So
I think it's important to speak to the motivation, because not every, pastor or evangelical leader that rises in popularity has evil intentions or motivations, right? I would argue the opposite. I like to give the benefit of doubt and believe that there's genuine gospel motivations behind, what certain famous Christians do. Mm-hmm. It's funny to talk about Christian celebrities. most people in the world haven't heard of a lot of
it's in Christian circles.
yeah, especially even pastor circles.
Yes, right.
And I can't even remember where I was going with that, but I think that in and thinking this idea of Christian celebrity and that we're drawn to that is that I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing if we have a preacher who has a way of ministering to even pastors or us outside of our local churches. The problem is when that becomes the steady diet, or when that becomes what we lean on instead of biblically getting involved in our own covenant community of faith and involved in a local church, submitted to biblical elders and having some accountability there versus, I'm listening to this podcast this week, or I'm watching the sermon at this church that's 5 states away that I'll, won't attend. And I know COVID has made this even more tricky. And so part of sorry, I'm going to bounce all over. This is the coffee, man. But part of the, I think, critique, the reason this has become written about more, Big Eva, is because I saw some major, blogs about how Big Eva has capitalized on the coronavirus. So now we're decentralizing leadership away from the local church, and we're looking to the internet for our Christian leadership. And what comes up? Well, the churches with the most influence or with the biggest budgets, and they have the ability to put these big productions together and things like that. Yeah. And so it is interesting to see, but I think that the steady diet, right? That's the important thing. Like you can listen to a pastor, periodically and just be really ministered to, but that doesn't relieve you of your responsibility to be in a body, a local church body.
Yeah, those should be supplemental to the steady diet that we have in the local church. There's great resources out there, and it's, I would encourage, with discernment to look into those and gain benefits from those things, but not at the expense of the local church.
Yeah. Now, could some of the Big Eva controversy come from the way that this country right now is very politically charged? I mean, I'm just saying, it seems like every major church leader that you would see on TV and stuff like that wants to give their political opinion one way or the other. And I think it almost seems like that's caused, I think that's where we really started seeing more speaking out against Big Eva, was since the real huge political divide really, we've always had a political divide in this country, but I don't think ever as pronounced as it is now.
Yeah, especially in the church.
Yeah.
One of our other elders who has not made an appearance yet on this show, Larry Ebinger, our eldest elder, we love dearly. Larry always says to us, the bigger the dog, the more fleas it has. He always says that.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so as a Christian organization or institution is larger, the more critique is going to be lobbed at it, the more, and some of it, legitimate, some of it not. And so I think we're quick to believe in our day conspiracies, and it's hard to know who to trust and who not to trust sometimes.
It is.
And I think that feeds into the conspiracy so much because we get skeptical of any organization that has a lot of influence.
Well, I think for me, one of the things is if I'm looking at any church leader, my big thing is what is their theological stance, not necessarily what is their political stance. So I look at a church leader on TV or on YouTube or whatever, and I go, okay, well, what do they believe theologically? The last thing in my head is, what do they think about this political thing, or what do they think about the Second Amendment? I don't really, because I want to know, are they teaching the gospel correctly?
Yeah.
Not, are they voting one way or the other? I want to know, are they putting out the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ correctly?
No, I get that, and I'm with you in agreement on that. However, I do think because Christian leaders hold a lot of authority in the eyes of their people and biblically, so I think people naturally want to know what the leaders think about political issues because that's what's being talked about the most. And that's kind of put us in a predicament. Like we don't like to preach politics and from the pulpit. We don't think that our goal is the gospel, right? We want to preach the gospel. We want to make sure that the gospel is clear to people, and we believe the implications of the gospel as it gets worked out in people's life does affect how you view government, does affect how you view all these different areas of life, in which may be voting issues. However, it is becoming increasingly difficult to not, really help people think about issues and political issues in our day, because it's so charged and such a, hot, popular thing to be discussing right now.
Right.
So it's tricky. It's tricky times we live in, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, questions, comments?
I don't think I have any more.
Yeah.
The dog does. The dog has an opinion out there.
I did have one last thought, because I didn't want to be misunderstood. Like, we put our stuff out, right? We're not a big church by any means, but we put our stuff out on the internet. We have folks that watch in different states and things like that, and we're appreciative of that. We think the internet is a great tool to connect people to the gospel, and we want that. We want listeners that, this show, we want people to be intrigued by the things we're talking about, and we want them to trek with us, subscribe to the channel, all of that. But at the same time, we want you to be in a local church. Right? We want you to get connected to a local church. Granted, the virus has made that very tricky for many people to connect to churches at this point. But that's the ultimate goal, right? That they would get into a body where they are discipling people, real relationships, face-to-face. There's not the anonymity that comes with the internet. I just think it's important. Yeah. It's a good final thought. All right, brothers, you good?
All right, absolutely.
All hearts clear?
Yep.
All right.
Have a good day,
talk.
everybody.
Yep.
Wait, don't leave just yet. If you like the video, make sure you give us a thumbs up. And if you haven't done so yet, click that subscribe button and ding that bell. That way you know when we release new videos. We love you all, and God bless.